Okay, hello everyone. This is CounterYolo bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And in today's video, we're going to talk about the Voyager-J, the new promo pack starship that's releasing later on this week. We'll talk about its general overview in terms of other science vessels inside the game, some regular Starship comparisons per usual on this channel, the other extras you get with the ship, and then the TLDR at the end of this video. Feel free to see the time links in the description or at the time bar at the bottom of the video. Going over this new promo starship in general. It is going to be a rather odd starship. Most of the time when we talk about science vessels in general, they have lower hull, higher shields, and there's the general ranges there. Keep in mind, most science vessels cannot use dual cannons, while most other science vessel subtypes can use dual cannons. I'll probably make a Starship Classes Explained 3.0 video later on this year, probably towards middle or later summer, but you have to wait until then for that. Keep in mind, these types of ships are generally a little bit on the weaker side and less desirable, especially because we have the Vern in the game, and well, we have lots of scout ships now, a lot more than we used to, that can use dual cannons and also have 6 weapons. So this ship doesn't have a 7. These ships don't have a 7 weapon, and they don't get to use dual cannons nor hangar bays. So in many ways, they're fairly lackluster versus many other ships. The slight upside is that, I mean, the ship does put those things on its head by saying, hey, instead of low hull, high shields, we'll have low shields, high hull. With a 4-11 instead of 3-3, so it's like improvement over regular science vessels. It also is decently maneuverable at a 0.22 impulse. The big things going for this ship, in my opinion, is that it is commander-command. There's only one other science vessel in the game with full command spec, with the inspiration mechanic. Also keep in mind, this is the first science vessel in the game, period, including all the subtypes, that has a full commander spec, plus access to a secondary deflector, and a battle cloak, or cloak of any fashion. All the other science vessels that have a cloak of some fashion either are lacking the full commander spec, or they're lacking the secondary deflector. Because I know some of you might point out the TLDR Intel carrier, which is a 2-hangar science carrier, but 2-hangar science carriers don't get secondary deflectors. So again, that one's missing that aspect. And all the Romulan science vessels do not have any full commander spec, because all of them are just lieutenant commander command. So there is that. For me, when I initially saw this ship, my initial 2 thoughts was, can it kit bash with the Voyager variants, and can it use the older Voyager consoles? There's someone on Twitter who also pointed out that it would be cool if it could use the 31st century console set, which I'm like, I didn't initially think about that, but you know, this is a 32nd century starship, so it would make sense in a way that it could use a 31st century console set. However, it was confirmed on Twitter, not Twitter, I think it was Reddit, and Joe and still pointed out to me on Twitter that it definitely cannot kit bash with the old Intrepid class variants. So it's very clear that Cryptic wants the Voyager-J to be like the Enterprise-J and like Enterprise-B, Enterprise-D, and stuff like that, in which these different other letter variants of iconic ships could potentially have unique consoles that are unique to them, but especially that, you know, the unique consoles from other versions of their ships cannot be used on other ships. You know, it's just the way that it is. It is a little unfortunate. I mean, like, the flagship set would be nice to use on all starships, but you know, Cryptic does what Cryptic does. And so my assumption, even though I haven't gotten the answer on the other things, my best guess is that you probably can't use older Voyager consoles on this ship, and you probably can't use 31st century console set on this ship. So from a performance perspective, well, without a hangar bay, you're relying upon the battle cloak to really justify this starship. So it's going to be up to you as to whether you want this starship or not. As we go into the Starship Comparisons part of this, I'll show you some things which I think could potentially be similar. Just for this video's sake, I am including the old event science vessels, just to show you some decent comparison stuff there. Keep in mind, scout ships can use dual cannons. This ship can't. So it's depending on what you're wanting, what things you're going for. There are many other ships that either were earnable or in the past or are still earnable today that could arguably be better than this ship too. At least when it comes to the fleet anyway. I think the closest ship we probably have, at least that's earnable, is probably the Fleet Titan. It's got a smidget lower hull, but for that cost of a slightly lower hull, it still has the regular 1.4, 1.445 shields that we would come to expect from most ships that are Commander Science. And with that, it still gets Lieutenant Commander Command, so it can still do Concentrated Firepower 3. It is true that the Janeway-class can do that plus Mixed Armament Synergy 1. But then again, a lot of science vessels probably want to do more science-heavy things. Just me thinking out loud here. If you really want to go more on the torp side of things, having a lot more tactical seating than this is probably what you would want. Also keep in mind, we have the Fleet Scout ship, which has very high maneuverability. And again, has the equivalent tactical consoles to this ship too. And very high flexibility in its seating too. Moving on, if you want a slightly more accessible temporal science vessel, the Nautilus only requires Tier 2 military, while the Fleet Scout ship requires Tier 5 fleet colony. So for a lot of your younger fleets, the Scout ship is just not going to be accessible at all, while the Nautilus probably will be. And depending on how expensive you want to go, for probably a similar type of cost, whenever Mud's Market stuff goes on its sales, the Vern from that Mud's time bundle thing that has the Vern in it is going to be in the same rough of cost, but it would be a count unlock. So the Vern is generally considered one of the best science ships in the entire game, and it's a standard science vessel. When it comes to battle cloaking stuff, we have our Romulan starships. Keep in mind the multi-mission science vessel mega bundle does include 9 ships. The Klingon versions just have a cloak, and the Romulan versions have a battle cloak. While the Tier 6 Vestas do have much higher hulls than the Explorer Warbirds. Explorer Warbirds do get battle cloaks, and they still have the hangar bay and secondary reflectors. So that's the advantage of those ships. The Fleet Leosa is the Romulan version of the Fleet Sutherland class. The difference being is that the Klingon and Romulan versions actually have higher hull, I think if I remember correctly, than the Sutherland. It's been a little bit since I've looked at stats of that particular ship, but in both of these situations, it's Lieutenant Commander Temporal. So it's depending on what you're going for and what you really want. I think these ships are both still fairly comparable, and one's from the fleet, and one is a 3,000 Zen purchase from the C-Store. So both are much cheaper than the ship too. Now the Fleet Leosa really can't do direct energy weapon stuff quite as much because it's 3 tactical console max, while the other ones are 5. So there is that. The fleet, or the C-Store Recon 6 Warbird, keep in mind these ships do come with auxiliary cannons and can actually use the auxiliary cannons in the front. So, which is a little bit more console friendly if you're wanting to do direct energy weapon science stuff. I really hope Cryptic adds more stuff in the future so that it's easier for console players to use direct energy weapon science stuff in the game. But, we can only wish at this point. When we talk about the general stuff, when I've theorized things, my actual initial thought was the Janeway class was just the lockbox Sona Command Science Vessel, and they merged it with the Not Cool Science Vessel. They had the battle cloak onto the Sona ship. They switched around the hull and shields, basically. Made a promo ship so it's slightly higher hull than what the flipping would actually be. Made it a smidge faster. Have the battle cloak on it, and put it on the Janeway class frame. That was just my initial thoughts on it. Feel free to let me know in the comments. The Sona ship is one of my favorite ships in the game. Its bridge is kind of lackluster, but I actually decently like the design itself of the ship. And also this bridge opportunity is not too bad. As a tank captain, I personally make both lieutenant seats their engineering. So I have fuel efficiency, so I can have vertical polarity and ox to Sif. But that's me being me. You get to do what you want with the ship. I just like to be a tank captain, so I have my biases in that arena. Really, the big things that pushes me a little bit away from the Janeway class is that for a similar type of costing, again, there's the legendary Intrepid, which has almost the same amount of hull and meaningfully more shields. Like this is like the 1.1 shields is what you basically expect from a cruiser. Most cruisers in the game is going to be about 1.1 shields. 1.25, a little bit stronger cruiser slash, your weaker science vessels. Like maybe your scout ships that will probably have a 1.25 or somewhere around there. And so the Miracle Worker Intrepid having 1.25 hull and 1.25 shields means it's got meaningfully good hull and shields, so you can use a blade of armor easily on the ship if you actually want. The way that I see the Intrepid versus the Eternal, by the way, for science tanking, the Eternal is better for a pure science that doesn't really want to use anything besides just Ensign Tactical for tactical team. Use the Lieutenant Tactical Temporal for the temporal ability, and the rest of this is just science from there. If you actually want to do, like entwined tactical matrices with, having tons of trivial spreads, the Intrepid, in my opinion, is a bit better because you can make the Lieutenant into tactical. And now you've got an easy 4 abilities here too. Though you technically could do that with this ship as well, and you have that tactical temporal here be that as well. When it comes down to it, I mean, the Intrepid does have an extra console because it's Miracle Worker. And it's got more kit bash options. And if Cryptic never releases a tier 7 starship in the game, eventually the Miracle Worker starships will outscale temporal when it comes to raw damage. Because Cryptic over time is going to continue to release more and more strong clicky consoles that just do more and more damage for science builds, because that's how Cryptic gets science players to continue to pay for stuff inside Star Trek Online, because they release so few science vessels inside the game. If you really want the higher statted starships, there are lockbox starships that have higher stats than this. The classic Crossfield, by the way, has a 1.3 hull with a 1.25 shields and an extra weapon. And even though it's not as fast as this ship, it's definitely very respectable. 0.18 is really at the upper end of what you expect any cruiser to do. So the Crossfield pretty much is a cruiser that's able to do science stuff because it's got a secondary deflector. So fantastic ship there. If okay with it being slightly more bulky, the Baul ship is a fantastic ship as well. Of course, there's also the Paradox ship, but I mean, this ship is a full spec ship, so that's definitely nice. With 1.35 hull and 1.45 shields, it's really a science vessel that is just has high hull as well. So my biases are things I think could arguably be better than this ship as well. And if you've got the two other crossfields here, in case you're curious about that, the Legendary Glenn also has Firepower 3, along with being a full temporal spec. No battle cloak, but it's got that stuff there too. And a lot of players have hard times using cloaks, and cloaks oftentimes have issues in PvE at certain points. So if you don't care about the cloak, the Glenn might be a nice option as well. And again, it's a starship you would get alongside Legendary Voyager-J. So just saying. Lastly, if you want a promo ship, the Vulcan Scout ship is a fantastic option too for higher maneuverability, smidgen higher impulse, but it also has pilot maneuvers too, so that's definitely nice. I'm also including the Sea Star Temporal Raider just because in the olden days, before we had stuff like scout ships, this ship was often used as one of your stronger PvP science vessels. It doesn't have a secondary deflector, and it still doesn't, but it's very maneuverable, and it's a full universal with temporal operative in there for both of its specialization seats anyway. So great ship in that aspect too. Overall, in my opinion, the big selling points for this ship actually has nothing to do with the ship. It has everything to do with the extras, which the extras meaning the console. There are a lot of people on Reddit, at least, that were looking at the ship and they're like, I don't care about this ship. I want that freaking photonic cannon. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, if what you care about is just that right there and nothing else, this might be worth it enough for you to get the ship. It doesn't have any passages listed on on the raw description on the ship blog. I'm guessing on Wednesday in the 10-4 weekly it'll show this off, and we'll find out this is actually a console or an actual just extra weapon inherent in a console slot. We will see. From the description, from the best that I could tell, it's a sensor masking suite that gives you some defensive stuff and does some firing in your forward weapon arc, and like the forward probably 90-degree weapon arc that softens enemies. I don't know if that means it's just raw damage or if it actually does some sort of strong debuff to enemies. It's not very clear there. And Cryptic changes stuff a lot on their blogs and stuff, and even when they release stuff, they can change things on the fly too. So I don't know if this is going to be like super meta, but I know that a lot of people are going to be buying this ship just for the space Barbie of firing the photonic cannon. And so I know that's going to be a thing, so I am listing that here. But also from the blog, I mentioned that this now exists because of Starship being able to use programmable matter, which based upon my understanding of it, that's really only a 32nd century thing. So I don't know if that means that the console can only be used on 32nd century starships, or if Cryptic will allow this to be usable on starships that even don't use programmable matter. I don't know. I'm just warning you all, just in case later on this week this ends up being a console that is restricted. Cool. All right. The Starship trait is enhanced cloaking integration. Whenever you cloak, you get some good healing and you get extra maneuverability. Whenever you decloak, you get a burst of fire and cycle haste. In PvE, all we care about really is the damage for most things in general. So it's the fire and cycle haste that most people are only going to care about, and I don't see this being good enough. I realistically, because there's the balance between that cloaking and decloaking, it's probably not going to be good enough for your high-end players to actually care about this Starship trait. If everything is actually relatively good, but it's not game breaking for PvE, it might be something for PvP, for people that are, trying to do the decloaking and try to burst you. And if you can't burst you, you just cloak, and with high maneuverability, you just move really far away. This is probably more likely a PvP trait than PvE, like with a lot of promo ships, unfortunately, in modern still. Now, I am going to talk a bit more on the 32nd century phasers. Now, the phasers off of this ship, it's mentioned in the blog that they will not be upgradable, but there's going to be a future lockbox, presumably a 32nd century lockbox, that will include upgradable 32nd century phasers. These new phasers have a proc that does two things. First off, it has an upfront burst of bridge officer cooldowns, like what you would see like in an Ox to Bat cooldown build with Ox to Bat duty officers, and it also gives bridge officer cooldowns over time, like what you would give to something like Photonic Officer. So just entertain the thought for a moment for me. Imagine a weapon that had its proc giving you cooldowns like Ox to Bat and Photonic Officer in a single weapon. And so the way that I personally see this is basically a lot of your cookie cutter builds typically use Ox to Bat for the cooldowns or Photonic Officer for their cooldowns. This is going to give us, assuming that it's actually a good proc and it's actually strong for the cooldowns, it's going to give us a third cookie cutter option. But you're stuck with phasers, and it's that you use 32nd century phasers, whatever the math ends up happening to be, to get the ideal amount of procs versus damage for the other powerful phasers. And boom, you have an option to get rid of those altogether. You have an extra couple of bridge officer abilities and potentially either an extra Starship trait or extra duty officers to use for your particular build. Gut feeling is this is probably going to be a DPS decrease from most of your DPS builds. Exotic builds will never switch to this because Improved Photonic Officer is just so ridiculously strong for them. Because 25% Cat 2 for exotic stuff from the Photonic Officer ability, no, they will not drop this. For me, thinking about this though, this is probably actually going to be a best in slot weapon for various forms of tanking inside the game, because tanks normally need more abilities, for survival. And so if I can use my weapons, if I can have a little bit of a DPS decrease on my weapons so that I can focus more on survival and stuff and my bridge officer abilities, then that's interesting. Now I can focus my consoles more on the DPS side of things, especially on a science tank. When normally I'm sacrificing 3 console slots for survival, maybe I can drop to 2 because now I've got a bunch of extra healing available in my bridge officer abilities, because I can drop Photonic Officer for another heal because I'm using my weapons for all that stuff. It's things I'm thinking about in my head. I don't know if that's actually going to play out, but that's the best scenario here. Of course, big downsides, obviously. There are DPS builds out there that already exist that don't use Oxtabat nor Photonic Officer for their cooldown management. The most notable example that I can think of is the Borg duty officers that do some cooldown stuff with certain bridge officer abilities and specialist abilities, combined with the trait from the Discovery D7 flight deck carrier that also gives you some cooldowns for your bridge officer abilities too. So those combined can cover your cooldown management if you're getting enough kills. The other downside, obviously, is that because these weapons aren't upgradable, Cryptic is basically asking the players who are going to buy everything anyway to effectively beta test this new weapon subtype on the live servers to basically figure out, hey, how powerful are these weapons right now? Are these too powerful? Are these underpowered? Where should this actually be? These weapons honestly could easily become a nightmare to balance. So I'm interested, but also a little bit skeptical on how these weapons are going to turn out. Yeah, TLDR, I don't think that the high end is going to care much about this. I think this is going to be more impactful for tanking than anything else. Just me throwing stuff out there. As for TLDR, so we have a new promotion pack ship, which is the Voyager-J, or Janeway-class Science Vessel. And it is a 4-2 starship, 4 weapons in the front, 2 in the rear, no access to dual cannons, no hangar bay, but it does have a battle cloak. So, and it is the first science ship in the game, any specialization, any subtype that has a full commander spec plus a secondary deflector plus a battle cloak. So if you're looking for a starship to have all 3 of those things, this is the first starship to have that. It is slightly odd that it is a Federation ship instead of a Romulan ship that is the first starship to have all 3 of these things, but that's just me thinking out loud. If you're wanting the new Voyager Space Rugby aesthetic from the Voyager-J, or if you're wanting the new Photonic Cannon console from this starship, those would be good legitimate reasons to get this ship. If all you're wanting the ship for is to have a tier 6 Voyager with classic Voyager aesthetics, a higher HP science vessel, high maneuverability science vessel, forward weapons science vessel, or a science vessel with a concentrated firepower 3, there are many cheaper options available out there for you rather than going to the promo stuff and getting this ship. Also, things of note, the 32nd century weapons, when they're included in the future lockbox, because the ones with this ship cannot be upgraded, I think they're going to be decent for tank builds that do direction energy weapons. There's a tiny possibility DPS builds might pick up a couple for their cooldown management, but again, that's very slim. I do not see exotic builds actually ever really using these 32nd century phasers, just because there's so many other strong exotic sets for them to use instead. They're just so powerful at this point. Not to mention that Proof Talk Offer is just way too strong for exotic builds for them to really ditch that for something like this. That's just me thinking out loud. That's my personal feelings of how I see this here. If you want to go earlier in the video, for those that skipped right to here to see those actual stack comparisons, you can, or you can go to the PDF in the description as well to basically skim over those if you want as well. Anyway, thank you all for watching. For those of you that haven't checked the community tab lately, I did start a poll up there just for y'all to vote on the order of videos that'll be coming out throughout the rest of this month. There is a video coming out later on this week that should have come out today, but because the Voyager-J was announced, this video is coming out today instead of that video. So that one's going to come out like Thursday or Friday, sometime around then. And then I'll have these 4 videos come out on a probably weekly basis for the rest of this month. Based upon your voting, will depend upon what the order of those videos is going to be, including my video talking about what I think the missing spell station combinations are that are really strong in the game, including examples for how you could probably build them, what I think the best ground costumes are, including as well some missing things that they probably could add and make money off of in the game. Some things I think Crypto could easily improve to keep the player base happy and bring people back. And then my personal theory on how Star Trek Online's timeline actually works, including some various particular mission arcs in particular that very much affect the timeline. Yeah, feel free to interact with that. I will make a snapshot of that like on Thursday or Friday of this week. Just because when I was making that poll, because this is my first time making a poll on YouTube, I didn't see a clear place on where to have an end date for the poll. So I just made the poll, and I'll make a screenshot so I know what the end results are. You probably can vote on that indefinitely because I didn't know how to set an end date for it. Anyway, feel free to also like and subscribe and comment if you like this stuff in this video, or if you really think that I misrepresented something in this video, feel free to comment and to let me know what I messed up on. Typically, I will make a few mistakes on Starship stats and such throughout the video, so feel free to let everyone know in the comments as well when I mess up on something. Thank you all for watching, and enjoy your week.